Hello and welcome to this Engerati Energy Talk. We're discussing in this panel the distributed generation tipping point, where it is, how we get there, do we design it, do we wait for it to happen? So that's what we're going to be talking about in the panel. But as is normal with our format, before we start, I'm going to go around the panel and get everybody to talk a little bit about where they're coming from in terms of distributed generation, and also where their expertise lies. And you'll see that we've put together quite an interesting panel with a lot of different actors here. So hopefully we're going to have a lively debate and a few collisions and exchanges of thoughts. So just to kick us off, Andy, can you tell us a little bit about where you are and how you're coming at it from that sort of behind the meter world, effectively.
Okay, thanks Adam. Andy Bradley, I'm a director with Delta Energy and Environment. I've been a director for about 6 years at Delta and been in the energy industry for about 20 years. At Delta we focus on heat and distributed energy, and we work primarily for European utility companies and manufacturers of all types of technology that are coming into buildings or the built environment. So we're looking across the space. It's much broader actually than distributed generation, it's distributed energy. Our perspective at the moment from a customer point of view is very much that customers are starting to engage with their energy in ways that they've never done historically. From my perspective...
Sorry, can I just ask, customers, you mean industrial customers?
Both industrial, commercial and residential customers. Right. So we're looking at different types of customer in the B2C and the B2B market. From our perspective, we see the utility industry transitioning from perhaps being the last great analog industry to becoming a digital industry. And really that's one of the themes I think you can see at this event, that actually what's happening in the energy industry and the energy system is it's transforming from an analog system to a digital system, and distributed energy is one of the key factors that's driving that transformation. So what we do for our clients is help them understand what the opportunities and implications are of all of these distributed energy developments and technologies and markets that are for their business and across the energy system, focusing very much on the customer end of the energy system, beyond the meter, and increasingly actually into distribution networks, which are starting to have to wake up to what's happening on the customer side of the meter in ways they've never had to do in the past.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. There are a number of points there which we're going to come to. John, can I go to you? And it's quite a nice segue where you left off with the distribution or the network needs to wake up to this. Can you tell us a little bit about where you guys are and what you're doing as well?
Okay, I'm John Sullivan. I'm a manager of innovation and technology in a company called EirGrid. We effectively run the transmission system, power system of Ireland. Why distributed generation is of interest to a transmission system operator is that we already have about 1,500 megawatts, or approximately about 10% of our total generation in distributed wind farms. There's about 150 wind farms. They range in size from about 2 or 3 megawatts up to about 20 megawatts. And that fundamentally changes this, not just the distribution system, but changes the transmission system, and it creates challenges. I'm interested, the digitalization, they're effectively different type of generation as well. All the distributed generators, PV and wind, aren't synchronous generators, and the amount of it on a synchronous area causes technical challenges. Now, those technical challenges we are getting on top of, but it requires a fundamentally different thought process. In general, I would say, if those challenges in bigger systems to get to the scale of ambition aren't resolved, then it will limit some of that rollout. I think they can be resolved, but at a European level, I don't see quite the thinking there just yet, and maybe it's just because it's a bit earlier, and our challenges for our island system are more prevalent, but I think they will be relevant in the next 10 to 15 years. But distribution generation, so Ireland is trying to run a power system as a system with more wind on it than, say, other systems by 2020, and distributed generation is going to play a major role in that, and how we work with our distribution system operators and what we do and how we change our own practice is key to that.
And so, coming over to you, Caroline, with your experience and what you're doing with Italy, can you just bring I think it'll be somewhat of a different perspective than what John's just said. Just tell us a little bit about what your view is as it pertains to sort of distributed generation or what it does for transmission or not, as the case may be.
Right, so I work for Terna. Terna is the Italian TSO. So we're also a transmission system operator. And as I said earlier, I think distributed generation is a great idea. I do think it's inevitable. I think that we are going in that direction. However, I think that there's still very many issues to contend with before we actually see the system going that way. As a TSO, we're responsible for the safety management of the grid. And I can tell you that even with a simple system, meaning a system where you have mostly thermal dispatchable generation and load and flow going one way, you still needed a TSO to handle that kind of safety. Now, when I think of a system where everyone is going to put a little battery and a little PV power plant in their home and they're going to start making their own decisions, as you said, become more conscious or more responsible of their own impact and their own habits and so on, that's going to be a nightmare. For me as a TSO, of course, I'm still going to be providing power and reserves on the system. We are moving that way in Italy. We have a total installed capacity of about 60 gigawatts, of which 26 alone is renewables. We do have an issue with them, and we are moving forward. We have about 75 megawatts of electrochemical energy storage solutions on ground, which we're testing. We have, I think, the second highest amount of pumped hydro in Europe right now, after Sweden, of course. And all of this right now is slave to handling these renewables. Now imagine as renewables increase, what kind of impact would that have on the grid? So yes, very worried, Adam. Very, very worried.
Good. So Erik, just to finish us off with the sort of introduction position, can you tell us a little bit about what you guys have done with Limejump? And it's the other end of the scale, where some of the other opportunities lie from a commercial perspective when you've got this sort of world.
Well, I think it fits nicely in because we are basically working a lot with TSOs. We operate exclusively in the UK market at the moment, but this idea of having distributed generation on the system, from our point of view, just means you need more flexibility. And you need varying types of flexibility. So non-synchronous generation is a problem. So stuff going on and off the system very fast is an issue, but you then need to counter that with flexibility that can respond adequately. And this is what Limejump does. So we consider ourselves a technology-driven utility. We aggregate distributed generation today. We trade it on the markets, but we also control it so that we could sell that flexibility to the national grid. And this is all the way down to things like frequency response. So response in 10 seconds, 30 seconds. The non-synchronous thing is I find quite interesting because even in the UK now they're looking at products that will go down to half a second response. But I think what we are doing is literally aggregating distributed generation flexibility into what we call a virtual power plant that we can then sell to DSOs or TSOs to try and help. We are not the end game solution, but we are part of that puzzle.
Okay, so to kick us off, I'm going to say something that may sound very naive. All of that sounds wonderful, but underneath it all, on the ground, we're still dealing with the laws of physics and physical challenges of, and it's not just flexibility, it's frequency regulation, it's all those side of things. So what's your view when you hear things like, oh, we'll have a virtual power plant and I'm sure it'll help, but there are a ton of other challenges, right?
Correct.
From the infrastructure.
So you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. So virtual power plants. All right, so we run the market, as I think you guys do as well. We run the dispatching and services market. So the way it works right now, we do not have DSR in Italy. It actually it's one of my challenges for the next year, is to try and create a DSR market, a demand-side response market in Italy. So this is good news for you guys, I imagine. Now, the thing is this, is that VPPs take away some of the load in the sense of the effort from the TSO, but at the same time, we relinquish some of that control. So when we're talking about flexibility, you try to explain the difference between, say I need 400 megawatts of reserves on the grid. So you got 3 power plants, each one there are 3 groups for 400 megawatts each. I can do a bunch of things. I can have all 3 of them give me 100 megawatts up, so I get my 300 megawatts, which means that I have flexibility now to go up. I got 900 to go up, and I have 300 to go down, and I have them in different locations, or I can just call one guy, or I can call 2 guys. That's what I mean by flexibility and control of the grid. I need that, because that's how I run the grid. And you never know, stuff happens. So I might get my market separated, in which case I definitely need to have that kind of flexibility on both sides of my lines.
Yeah.
So to me, VPPs are a great idea in one sense, because you lose some of that. I can only imagine today we're running with maybe 20 relevant power plants that are running our services. Tomorrow it's going to be thousands.
Yeah.
So thinking that somebody else will pick up some of that slack is a good idea. On the other hand, when I did tell the head of the Department of Dispatching Operations, the guy freaked out. He's like, I'm not going to lose control over my grid. I want to decide which flexibility where. So these are some of the elements that we're considering when modeling the market for demand response.
I mean, historically, all of your flexibility has been on the supply side, and virtually
Correct.
very little has been on the demand side. You're
got some
losing control of
interruptions.
the supply side, aren't you? So you need flexibility on the demand side in future.
Yes.
So I'm interested in what's your expectation? How much flexibility would you expect on the demand side in future? Do you expect 10%, 30%, 50%? I'm asking because I spoke to a TSO recently who's looking at 50% in 2030,
Yes,
which is a
I think
massive number.
I agree. I think it's going to be progressive. We're going to start with, CNIs or big loads. So we're going to start looking at those guys. And afterwards, we're going to move to medium loads before we start going into the thousands of residential and retail.
Yeah.
The kind of flexibility you did that way, actually, compared to other TSOs, one of the main issues we have in Italy is low load, not high load. So most of the reserves that we will be buying is what we call down reserves. So, but for the load, it will be, I need you to absorb more, which is counterintuitive.
Okay.
But our issue with over 18 gigawatts of solar is sunny Sundays, where you have not enough load to hold on to it.
Right.
These are feed-in tariff systems. I still have to pay them.
Right.
They're must-runs because you got marginal price for a megawatt hour of solar is 0.
Okay, yeah.
So what am I going to do? I need somebody to pick up their.
Right.
You see, what we find is that a lot of times, even in the UK now, a lot of the focus gets put on demand response, as in I&C turn down, turn up. What has less focus is the actual flexibility in the plants, biogas, the actual flexibility in solar itself, the flexibility in distributed wind. Subsidies create a problem because you can't downgrade wind.
I agree.
Because you lose your subsidy and then you only have flexibility one way.
Absolutely.
But I think if flexibility comes in and they can get incentivized the right way, actually subsidies can go away, which is good for a country or whoever has to pay it out, consumers, I guess. But I think like Germany is a great example. They have got massive amounts of flexibility in biogas, which they can literally ramp down 3, 4, 5 gigs in minutes. And demand response is a lot less. So I think it needs to be a blend, and that's what we're doing, is blending those two things together to try and really get full flexibility out of the system.
John, can I bring you in at this point? Because when we're talking off air, you were talking a little bit about how you guys manage all of this.
I think the essence of the question was, the discussion has come around and we talked about synchronous, and the issue with non-synchronous, and you can solve it with fast things. And actually, the word I think we should be using is resilience. Society has come to expect that the power is there when they want it. It's a lifestyle choice. It's utility. It's not a commodity. It's a utility. In going to this world, and I do believe we will have way more of this, people are putting in capability in their home, nothing to do with me. They're putting in nests and hives, they're putting in controllers, they're not being used, they will live the lifestyle they use. That's going to cause me challenges, but I genuinely believe they can be overcome. A lot of it will be in the distribution system, less will be on the transmission system, and this is going to change. Now, when I call resilience, when we talk about flexibility, the other things, non-synchronous, are as important when you get into in Ireland, when we're up at the very highest levels, up to 70, we're looking at running our system with total system, 75% of the system by 2020 coming from wind and being secure, right? And a lot of that's going to come from distribution. It fundamentally changes the game. So when you get all these PVs, and PV is a similar sort of technology, and so I want to talk about resilience. I absolutely see that the aggregator or virtual demand side and is going to play a part both from the market point of view and also from the control point of view, that I don't have the ability, nor will I ever be like, to dispatch everyone on the system. And it's going from a model where we have 10 generators or 100 generators to 1,000 generators. And I think that, and I'm saying we can't. However, it changes your mindset. When you get into that world, and if you start to reward for other things, so the market structures at the highest level don't reward for flexibility or resilience, and resilience is more than that. And so therefore we're not actually getting the investment in complementary capability to allow PV and demand side to compare, and we can talk about that. But if you get that sorted, if you get those sort of things sorted, these people will come up with good products. They'll link in with the home. The Googles and the Amazons are making massive investment in getting into energy. It's going to happen. So I'm not going to say stop. I'm saying I'm trying to get ahead of the game. So in Ireland, we are already trialing demand side management, not only at control level for industrials, but residential level, and also looking for services from residential, right? So that's and this is quite embryonic, but it's the idea of, look, in the new world, when we have all of this capability, we have to look traditionally, our traditional models fall away. Yes, I classically got it from generators, all this stuff, but if those generators aren't on the system because I've got loads of wind, I've got loads of PV, I have to get it from a range of places, or you shouldn't go there because society. And once you get your head into that space, I'm not saying it's easy, and I certainly agree there's challenges, but I see it as a massive opportunity rather than a problem. But I do think for the distributed generation point, given that there'll be mainly PV and mainly people are talking about when the cost of PV drops to this, it will take off. And it will to a certain extent. The problem is it will cause a system challenge. If those system challenges aren't addressed properly, then you're going to have problems. And they can't be just addressed by TSOs and DSOs. The money comes into it because people, you've moved from a command and control model to more an incentive model, and the incentives aren't right at the moment to allow that ambition to reach the scale that is in there. But there are new technologies, people working on things, but in all of the cases, say when you scratch away, it's a regulated price somewhere. I'm sure there's some, and what we need to get is the market. It's not just real-time pricing, it's more than that now, you know.
So one thing for us, and this is of course a difficult thing for a TSO or a DSO, is that for the market price to start working right, you guys almost need to relinquish control down to going, I will run capacities daily, which means the price could get driven really high, and you suddenly have a cost.
Well, I think you've got to understand the model. The issue, it depends on the model. As EirGrid works, we don't buy energy, we don't sell energy. We're the man in the middle. In some models, and possibly in Terna, they may have to purchase the TSO. I know in Germany they purchase the wind, and they are the arbiters. But that's an additional role. That's a commercial role based on legislation in Germany to say the TSO must buy the wind and make them whole, even if they can't run it.
I was thinking just flexibility. So the procurement of flexibility that you use.
Yes.
So like right now, for example, in the UK, it runs monthly, quarterly, but the price signaling on it is not correct.
Well, the only thing I would say about here's a question I'll put to you, right? In the energy market, so where we're moving to is a world where when you talk about PV and you talk about wind or you talk about they're capital investments, right? They're capital up front, but they create volatility in the energy profile and in the energy prices. So what you need is large-scale capital investment, yet you have an energy market that has greater volatility. Now, those two actually are problematic because that greater volatility is making a more uncertain investment. And I'm saying, so yes, you can have all the real time you want, but how's that going to help you make a long-term investment to pay off the capital?
Well, yes,
Now all I'm saying is what we need to create is understand the scarcities of the issues in the future that are linked to public policy. So we want to be more renewable, less carbon. Factor them in a way that rewards for performances that are capable, like yours, that are complementary, and do it in a way that it's a little bit more predictable and certain for capital investment. And once you get that going, now I think it's a mindset change, a lot of the challenges that we do have will be solved by everyone doing their bit and seeing the reward about it. So
the only problem with having certainty on the market is it's no longer a market. So
Yeah.
if you don't have the volatility there, it suggests
well,
the price signals in that way.
it's what
Which is why you've got CFDs, FITs, ROCs to take that certainty and put it out. I don't want certainty.
Well, sorry, there's a degree of certainty. I'm saying what you need, you still need to be able to have a reasonable prediction. So I'm happy that I have our price, but you need to, if you've got a 10-year payback on an asset, you have to make a judgment call on that, and you need risk mitigation strategies. Energy-only prices don't do it. And actually the technical scarcities are moving into an area that we've never really considered before. Ancillary services is a relatively small part of any investment in the wholesale energy market. It's around review in Europe in around 2%, up to about 2% of the overall investment. Now that's just not enough for people to care about performance. And by the way, due to the way the industry has evolved, people like you at the moment, in many cases there's barriers to allow you to get in there because the laws and the legislation haven't been written as such. Now when you go into a world where we break down those laws and we break down those legislations, then the issue is there enough money to reward what we really need? And I'm saying I don't believe there is. I think what we've done in Ireland is showing that. I can go into a lot of detail on that. But more importantly, when you look at the figures of Ireland as a system, and then you look at where Europe's trying to get to by 2050, there are remarkable parallels. And when you do any sort of analysis European level, and this is about the internal market of Europe, that's setting the highest level signals. And there's major discussions about even the energy market, the target model as isn't necessarily sufficient to get you there. This is the EU Commission, this is not just a man from Ireland. And from that, there are changes that will help you and bring these technologies forward.
When you're listening to all of this, I mean, what are you thinking? Because the words that are jumping out, people need to relinquish control, let go, let loose, and then John's quite right. Also saying that the market needs to change, but you've still got a day job. You still got to make sure that resilience and delivery. And I respect the fact that each country is different, but when you listen to all of this, what are you thinking? Are you just going?
I'm thinking that it's a very different system. You're not synchronized with Europe, and it's a much smaller system, so you're free to run it and to bring the advances that you feel are proper. In a European context, and it's a bit more difficult. Flows are regulated. Yes, we are trying to move towards a common market, but it's going to be complex because you have different laws and regulation set in each country, and just the standardization is going to be complicated. I think that we have to sit down and decide how many reserves we need, and it's common aid from one country to the other. So I'm not saying that we're not trying to look towards the future. I'm just saying that it's going to be more difficult to move in that direction. That's pretty much my first opinion on it.
Yeah. And, from what you're viewing, because some of these things can happen. They can happen by design. They can just happen by messing around with the market. Probably the wrong choice of words, but it sometimes feels like that when you talk to people who do markets. But it can also happen by, just a movement. I was talking to a gentleman from IKEA recently who said, we want to take charge of our own energy destiny as a business. Yeah. So we are going to be looking at all these technologies, and we're just going to do it. Yeah. We don't care about the markets. We don't care about your problem or your problem. We're just going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you seeing that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting listening to John there. The resilience of the system is obviously, of central importance for everybody, but the complexity of the energy system is only going to increase. It's unavoidable, in my view. And predicting what that complexity will be and the shape of the transformation system is impossible. I mean, it's basically our day job. It's what we help clients try and understand and do. But there are so many different people coming from so many different perspectives, both within the energy industry but from other verticals. I mean, a lot of the big European utility companies see their main competitors over the next decade as emerging not from within the energy industry but from Google or Apple or
absolutely.
the telecom sector or white goods. It could come from a number of different industry verticals that are really clashing with the energy sector for the first time through connectivity, connected buildings, the digital agenda. And a lot of those new industries are moving into energy for the first time. So that's going to change the energy market at the customer end in ways that today are really difficult to predict. And the implications for the transmission operators, I think, are pretty significant, but unavoidable, I think. I mean, we're doing, I think about the questions we're being asked at the moment. We're being asked questions by technology developers about, how do we get fuel cell micro-CHP into customers' homes? What types of home, what type of customer? Heat pump companies looking at developing smart heat pumps and then using those to provide demand response services for the system. Global wind developer looking to move downstream, move towards the customer to start enabling a demand response service, thinking about storage, which we haven't talked about so far. So there's so many different aspects, and actually one of them we haven't talked about yet is heat. I think electricity generation is in a way the easy part to decarbonise in our energy system, but heat is a really difficult challenge.
Yeah.
Decarbonising European, particularly Northern European, Northern Italy, away from gas is a really difficult challenge, and if that decarbonisation happens through electrification, the implications for the electricity system are massive. And a lot of what we see at the moment is looking at technologies, alternatives to using a gas boiler, and how do we transition from a gas boiler to an electrified system or zero carbon heating system in future. It's part of the key challenge, and the implications of that for the energy system I think are massive.
Just and to support that, the EU in the Energy Framework document in 2012 basically said that energy usage by 2050 in electricity will double in importance, move from about 19% of the overall energy mix in Europe to around 40%, largely through electrification. The other thing that I would absolutely say, and this is where in discussions with some other TSOs and DSOs, I ask a simple question. Do you think that Apple and Google are putting serious money into cracking the home and getting in there in some way? Yes. 3.2 billion on Nest, they are doing it. Do you think they're talking to the TSOs about what's going on in the system and care? No. So I know that somebody's going to come up with a residential proposition that they will get into the home and get some control over the homes. It's going to happen. Now I can either say, stop, I don't want that to happen, it changes more, say, it is going to happen. How do I get ahead of that, get out in the boogie board, ride the wave, and try and get incentives, because it's not the control model. Incentives that their behaviours are such that they behave in a complementary fashion. And that's not just a distribution point, it is a transmission point. I think the tipping point on embedded controls is very close, because somebody's going to crack it in the next 5-6 years. The issue is, once it starts to roll out, and there's always going to be a rollout time to take, so it might be 10 years before it's significant. How do we make sure that the right incentives there, that the general behaviour in aggregate solves both local issues and system-wide issues without the classical command and control? I'm still saying there's going to be control, but it's not in the same way.
Because I think the tipping points will come, John, when the customers start wanting this stuff. And at the moment it's an industry pushing.
It's the residential proposition. And once they want it, they'll just take it.
And then the market will go very quickly because people want it, and that's when the market will take
right,
off.
and that is incentives.
Yeah.
Because if you get those incentives right, that work for you.
Correct.
Right,
That's the whole point.
I am willing now to change my behavior because of it. It's a goal. So
Follow the money, and unfortunately right now the money doesn't flow to the issues that I think will happen when all of this stuff happens and what public policy wants. And I'm saying, that's okay, now let's just try and redirect where that money goes, and we will get aggregate better behaviours. I still, at the backstop, it's going to be the TSO to come in and say no at something. But I think it's in a fundamentally different way when you've got this distribution worlds, whether it's generation or and.
Do you think it's possible that the TSOs effectively will have to lose a lot of their current responsibilities and push them down the system to DSOs, even micro?
I think the fundamental role of a TSO, if you're talking about the overall system security, I think we won't lose that. But if you look at what EirGrid, when we go out to 2020 and 75% coming from wind, we have lost 25% of our total reactive control that we normally have.
Right.
It's gone because we've lost about 30% of our inertia, which is an issue, and we've fundamentally increased need for ramping. I'm saying that's a reality. I can't stop that happening. So the question is, what's my best strategy? And it isn't the old strategy, which was we'll tell you what to do. It's let's get a bit of money, and it's a range of things, and I don't have the time to explain it, but I think if you do it, you can make progress on it. But I'm not saying it's easy. It challenges all mindsets, and I also think for rolling out, what my big concern is that the tipping point will come that the technology is cheap enough in the residential proposition, and at a point in time society suffers because the system isn't resilient enough, because we haven't addressed them and the incentives haven't been strong enough.
Yeah.
And I think the only people who can bring that discussion to it are TSOs, because we're the system. To me it's about if the DSOs all become active, and the aggregate behaviour of DSOs singly is okay, but the aggregate behaviour leads to a collapse in the European power system. What politician is going to turn to who and say, why didn't you tell me this wasn't going to happen? And I feel it's always going to be TSO, you're the system operator. Well then give us some oversight and let us work with you to come out with how we make this happen in a secure way.
But it's also about the investment. I mean, when I listen to this, I mean, I used to work in the IT sector. I remember a conversation that resonates somewhat similarly to this here. Is someone was saying that, oh, it's all great, all these companies talking about launching streaming service. This is pre-Netflix, but who's building the capacity? Who's going to build the broadband infrastructure to put all of this in, and how are they going to get a return? Some of it sounds a little simpler here as well, because it seems to me, again, I may be oversimplifying it, what you're saying is there needs to be a capital infrastructure investment, because not all of it is going to be solved by markets. Some of it will be solved by technology, storage, batteries, whatever, like that whole gamut. But how do we get the money to make sure that you're able to build or make your infrastructure ready now and start now, because this takes time, right? You don't do it overnight. You aren't running an iPhone where you download an app to fix something. It's an engineering problem. So that when this happens in 10 years' time, or even shorter, that you're ready. I mean, is that a worry for you, that you're not getting that investment to design and put the engineering solution in, or is that less of a worry?
Okay, so as a TSO, we are a regulated business. Life is easy. We got the money.
Right.
The problem is not developing the infrastructure. The problem is knowing how to use that infrastructure in a way to support the changing grid. So right now the infrastructure was built in order to get power from the generation to the load, and it's one way. It's a very different infrastructure from the one that a distributor has. Ours is mesh, the distributor is radial. So to answer a question that was asked before, no, I do not think that it can be replaced. The job of TSO does, just because of structure of the grid itself. You need more nodes. You need to have options to get from point A to point B. The more nodes you have in the system, the more options you get. A radial system will not give you that kind of flexibility. So I think that we will keep on being the backbone of the system. You have to have a backbone of the system. As I mentioned earlier, especially in Italy, we have mostly big cities and not as many people in the isolated suburbs, American style. So you live in a big city, you live in an apartment. You live in an apartment, you can't really put solar panels on top of your roof. What you're going to have is you're going to have to keep on buying energy from the grid. You will become smarter. You will have your own battery. You will be able to perhaps, buy energy from a solar power plant that it's kilometers away from you, and that will be your virtual solar panel on the roof deck. But who's going to bring that energy from that solar plant to your home? That's going to be us.
Well,
your
it could
friendly
be,
neighborhood TSO.
or your local community distribution company.
I
mean, if people become more self-sufficient, then they need less from the transmission system, but the cost of the transmission system will remain the same. And at some point, won't people say that's too expensive? It's worth us investing in a local solution.
I think there is a world that The question on microgrids, and that's effectively the discussion, I always get into it and say, well, how much do you think it's going to be of the total system? And I definitely see areas, and I was talking to a person in America who big loads now are willing to do it for 12 cents, guaranteed 12 cents a kilowatt for 20 years. Yeah, do it. They go off grid, they put in a bit of storage, they put in a gas turbine. But I'm saying, okay, that's niche. How much of that is going to happen? How many locations is that? And is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 30% of the load? And when you get into that, then I say, now you got to understand that the ratepayer, what's left, is going to have to pay the similar costs.
Yeah.
Now you might think there's going to be loads of migration at a point in time. There isn't all those locations to migrate to. They can't do that. And at some point, if you're undermining, if you're not giving that money, then there's not the investment, then there's resilience issues. So that 70% of society is saying, I don't like this answer,
Yes.
even though you're happy, I'm not.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some dislocation. So I don't accept Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute when he says it's going to be a simple transition, because I think he's missing the resilience issue.
Yeah.
And it's not. But
I agree with that.
I still see there could be potentially a world where it is broken up into more smaller systems. I don't think it's likely, and as a TSO, my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. But I can see a world, but then I'll get into a more nuanced discussion. Do you really think? How is that going to play out? Where are you going to suddenly? I look at Chicago, I lived there for a while, and you look out, there's 25 million people, not an inch of grass for when you look at the John Hancock Tower. Just where are you going to put all these gas turbines to get off everyone off grid? They need that grid, and that's not going away for 25 million
But I
people.
think that communication or that agreement between TSOs and DSOs needs to become very clear, because you can share assets, you can share flexibility, but at the moment in the UK that's a big issue. Because you have plants sitting at DNO level that want to get used by both the TSO and the DNO.
I have only one question on that. I agree with the TSO. If there is a problem where the system is blacked out because of behaviour in good faith of DSOs and aggregate doing active stuff, who do you hold responsible for allowing that to happen?
But I guess that depends on how the market is designed.
No, it's not the market. This is whose backside is on the line for when your prime minister goes, there's a blackout. How did this happen? Now, if that ends up to be the TSO, which invariably I think it will, because you know what the TSO will say? Well, how could I have possibly known about the system? I'm only running these radial things. And so,
But you have constant blackouts at DSO levels today.
Yeah, but we don't at transmission level. And
No, you don't at transmission level, you're right. But I still think that if you're looking at flexibility, that line needs to be defined.
No, the line
the
and
market mechanisms need to
but
work.
but it comes back to a fundamental, right? So, and all I'm just saying, the reason why is it's the only issue between DSOs and DSOs. I think DSOs can do whatever they like, and they work with us with protocols and all that. We do, and we need to get much better, and I fully accept that. I still come back to the governance issue of who, if there's a blackout because of DSOs acting actively in aggregate, who should have spotted that and intervened. And it's not a regulator.
But the only way around that is that the TSO does it all.
No. It's about understanding the governance framework and then developing appropriate protocols.
Sure. Yeah.
But once the governance framework is the TSO is on the hook, then we have to have some oversight rights on those protocols.
Right.
That's it, and it's a governance issue. And then you can do whatever you want, because I now know you are going to come to me, but then please at least give me some oversight. Say, Mr. DSO, that's very good, and that's all, but in aggregate we can't, so could you just modify it?
So what you're saying is that someone needs to be on the hook for the resilience.
Well, I'm okay to say it's not, but I believe we're in the fire line right now for that resilience. If society or policymakers say that's okay, but let's be clear, energy is generally a dirty political issue. They don't want to know. It's either energy prices going up and it's a pain in the backside. I can tell you, if you have a couple of blackouts, it would be number one issue on the politics. So I know that's what's going to happen. We all know. You look at what's happening in the United States. Italy had a bit of a blackout about 10 years ago. Copenhagen, London lost a lot of its power. These then get very high tension and never waste a good crisis, because you can get actually traction on that. But I want to do it before we get there. If we are on the hook, then we have to be given at least an oversight right. So it's not the TSO and DSO are equal. The TSO has a system-wide thing, and we need to be able to, and that's not clear at the moment. And that's
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think we've lived through a sort of golden age of system resilience in Europe in a way?
I think
We've
we
been
have.
lucky at the last 2 or 3
you
decades.
have no idea. I mean, I can tell you stories that thank God you don't know about. Of how close you
we
get.
came
Oh, really?
to, yeah.
Right, yeah.
How close you come to blackouts.
Right.
The last one happened like less than 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Anything can happen.
Right.
You have, again, just in our situation, you have in Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, we have a load that is about 1 gigawatt, and we have 1,800 megawatts. That means that it's 1.8 times the load of renewables. You know what that means? You got no operating reserves. Anything, one little thing means that the system will accelerate into doom.
Right. Right.
And it happens quite often. You have situations, or dispatching operations gives us these kind of situations quite often.
I
So,
think if you go back to the histories of why do we have electricity systems, we had kerosene. That was somebody came up with a generator that sold light. We sold light, then we realized we could do all these, came out with these interconnected. That model has worked for 100 years. It served countries and society well. It has been fundamentally challenged because of technology and public policy. That's okay. But at the end of the day, what I am of social, if we end up giving the consumer a less quality of lifestyle because of what we do, that consumer will kick. And the consumer, the rollout of all your products and all your capabilities and all your business models will fall.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, there is a resilience question in this new world that is not being properly addressed. If you address it and get on top of it, there's a much better chance to do it in an efficient, effective way, and everyone wins. So your market becomes 6 billion electricity consumers on the planet by 2050. Not it's 100,000, then there's problems and you stop the rollout.
Right. Yeah.
So, as we're coming to the end of our time here, I just want to ask one question. The sense I get, the fact that we are talking here and no one has mentioned, oh, I don't know when distributed generation will come. We've just taken that as a read. We have probably mistitled this debate.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not the distributed generation tipping point. We can probably look, it happened probably sometime and history will tell us when. It's about the resilience. Are we all
Flexibility, adequacy of the system, and resilience of the system.
Yeah, I thought the question wasn't quite right because it's not a single tipping point either. There's a series of tipping points around heat, around storage, which I haven't really mentioned, around connectivity, around actually the business model in the energy industry. And we work primarily for the energy suppliers, but I think the network companies absolutely need to rethink their business models actually, and what is the role for a TSO, a DSO within this transforming energy system. So there's a series of connected tipping points, and the complexity of it all is immense.
And I think customer engagement, by the way, which you were kind of touching
Absolutely.
on, is critical. Because this system will not work without the right customer engagement tools.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the customer.
Get the response.
Yeah, you totally agree with John on that as well. It's all about the customer at the end of the day.
So we've had lots of sound bites. Unfortunately, we have come to the end here. I noticed lots of you glancing nervously at your watches and things. You've got other things to do. So I'd like to thank you all for taking part. It's been great. The output has been great. Even I let it go because I think it was absolutely relevant. I think, again, distributed generation. It's about resilience, flexibility, markets, God knows what else. So
customer.
There's lots of things to sort out. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.